To the second home map of Mista, which is King of the Hill. Down south, we will have VortiX playing as the French in blue, and to the north, we're going to have Mista spawning in as the Red Mongols. The Mongols will give him a flexibility when it comes to finding trees, though, and that's not something that we have talked about yet. Mongols might actually place their TC a tiny bit closer to those bigger forests.
Yeah, this is actually one of the situations where being like the Mongols is a ridiculous advantage of this generation. Any other Civ gets this Northern generation, you're flipping the table and asking for a restart. Look at the back here. There's no wood. There's no reset. There's no soft point where you can safely gather wood. It's all to the center. But this works to the Mongols' advantage because remember what we've seen about the pasture spam. The only way I tick it and say it's a good move by Mista is if he has a close Uvu. And because he shifts towards the center where these stone deposits are clustered, you're likely to get that. And in a lot of ways, Mista has been very fortunate this generation. The Uvu's in range. He can play into the pastures. And also, he can safely expand to the west and get huge chunks of wood available to him so easily. On the other side, VortiX does have plenty of wood sites around him, but notice that I think the more important detail here is that this wood is so easily accessible for Mista. I think he got a great start here, and we're in for a great game.
Absolutely. Like, on the right side, there is basically no easily accessible wood for VortiX, and while on the left side he has a big forest to work with, both of his small forests are on the left side and just generally very exposed to aggression from Mista. So Mista's gonna be able to apply a lot of aggression from the left side, not only deny potentially all the forests, but also some gold and even the berries. So Mista, if he positions his force on the left side, he could do a ton of damage to VortiX, and there is the first pasture coming out here for Mista. Such a clever placement. It's actually even closer to the TC, so not directly right next to the Ovu. It's within the Ovu influence, but as close to the TC as possible, so the walking time is minimized.
Yeah, that's actually nicely done. A lot of players got good at this. We see it with outposts as well, right? They tend to put it right on the edge so they're not blocking anything else being put nearby. And it's a little bit short of a distance to run, so it's less efficiency for your workers. I got to feel a little bit frustrated for VortiX looking more at this south side. I think it's kind of weird that this generation didn't actually put any sort of like cliffside on the west side of his base. I think it becomes a lot more defendable if that's there. This amount of open ground could be very exploitable by Mista. It's just a case of what type of composition he wants to go for. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like spears and archers. Maybe try to play for that early outpost rush, because as you mentioned, these small wood lines leave you very exposed to the French player in the south. And there's no easy way to alleviate that, because the big ones to the south and west are so far away from the safety of your town center.
Second pasture now coming up here for Mista. He also managed to collect precisely one sheep with that con over here, so part of the reason why he has to add so many pastures at the beginning is because he doesn't have a ton of sheep to work with. But as I said, this is something that he commonly does as his Mongol build order. It's obviously he's not doing any kind of Dark Age pressure at this point, so it comes down to whether he's just gonna go try get to fast Feudal, or maybe this is some kind of fast castle build over here. If he can beat VortiX to Castle Age here and go double Lancers, VortiX is gonna have a serious trouble. Because, as I said, this map is just wide open for raiding for the French with their knights, but that's just as much applicable for the Mongols if they get to Castle Age and Lancers.
I think Feudal is critical here. Like, it almost feels like I'm a broken record. I think this is the meta. Like, this is the patch of Feudal. And it definitely shows in this matchup, because if Mista gets initial control, he can set up the outpost network, which will give him a staging point from which to operate with fast dynamic units, which then leads into those lancers, which will always outmaneuver the French knights. Now, should they both arrive in castle at the same time, and that outpost network isn't down, you have to give the edge to the French knights, because if they get that charge off against the lancers, they get buff damage for 3 seconds. All of a sudden, you are being overwhelmed in the blink of an eye. And although a Khan can negate some of that damage, you have to be so on point with the use of your maneuver arrow and your defense arrow to make that work. So I think really important that Mista finds a way to kind of set the trend in Feudal, move across the map, oppress VortiX for having such a exposed and open base area, and then essentially allow himself to cruise into castle while VortiX is struggling to get the resources together for it.
Looking at the base of Mista, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a direct fast castle, or at least he's going to spend some time in Feudal Age for sure, because his resource bank isn't looking super powerful. Obviously, there's a lot of risk associated with a naked fast castle build from a Mongol player out here. The reason why I'm saying that this is actually a possibility is because, first, it actually plays into the usual Mongols playstyle of Mista, and second, it's because I'm not exactly sure what he would do against the French over here in Feudal Age if it doesn't go for early aggression, because he's yet to make a single production building, so by the time he gets his army out, VortiX is gonna have a couple of knights and he's gonna be able to start harassing him. So I feel like if you're not going for a ton of aggression, It might already be a little too late, but we're getting the answer, or are we?
It depends. There's no Gurst and no Pro Scouts coming. It's going to be stable into Horsemen. I think he's looking to ramp up into about 8 Horsemen and then trying to, like, aggress his opponent's wood line.
He canceled the stable, and now he's replacing that with a barracks, so he felt a little indecisive over there, and it looks like it's just going to be Spearman defense, as it seems. He's aware of the French adding knights, of course. It's quite predictable out there. He's just going to micro back with that con for the time being. The question is when VortiX is going to add that archer range, because when you're up against any civilization that has a legitimate spear opening against the Royal Knights, you want to go for that fast archer range immediately, and VortiX is already doing that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no doubt in my mind. Like, it makes more sense. When I saw the oh, no, stable. So he's actually going for the spears plus the horsemen. This is interesting because actually, like, while the archers are annoying, the spearmen just negate all the powers of the Royal Knights. So I think the whole idea is he just wants to try and capitalize on stabbing into that villager count if VortiX ever reveals it. And of course, if you end up being VortiX moving out into this mid ground, you've got a long way to run to safety. So your archers could easily be picked apart. It is definitely a funky opening. It's, if I had to like give statistics, I'm pretty sure this is the least trodden path of the 3 options, right? Like usually it's either racks and archers or archers and stables. It's not often that we get treated to racks plus stables.
Mista still adding pastures over here for himself. He's still on gold though. So this is why I'm suspecting that it might actually end up being some sort of semi-fast castle approach, because if he wanted to go very heavy on the horseman and spearman department, he would probably pull away the villagers from gold. Because there is not a single Gurf or anything like professional scouts or wheelbarrow, no blacksmith so far for any kind of upgrade. So the only reason why he would be piling up gold at this point is to potentially think about castle age.
I think he might be right here, but he's got a few initial horsemen coming out. Looks like actually no, he's going heavy in, so he's going to have 6 horsemen in total and then upgrade them into the normal stats from early. The interesting part is actually, I think this is a direct result of what he scouted VortiX doing. VortiX went for pro scouts, and this is a logical play for a French player with this generation because you don't have enough wood to justify a switch over to farmlands safely. So instead, he's going to go for the safety of gathering game underneath his own TC. But because this was revealed by Mista, Mista now feels like he can pressure the wood supply and choke VortiX out, so the only thing he can really gather is food.
And that's a nice reaction. It's very possible that he changed up his strategy on the fly. He picks off 1 scout from the opponent, and suddenly it's going to be difficult for VortiX to access the hunts, especially because he's walling out the other hunt. So it's going to have to require a gate to get through those. And as things stand, Mista is able to deny one of those, and he's sending the horseman to the right side. So, as you said, it's all about sort of suffocating your opponent when it comes to resource access. Mista also banking up some resources as we speak. So he's going a little heavier on the Feudal Age than maybe initially planned. But still, continuously piling up gold behind this one.
Yeah, and to be honest, Mista could just ride in for a fight right now. Like, you're pretty strong. The only reason he hasn't yet is he's waiting for the early horseman upgrade. But there it is. Moving in with the new arrow. Clash with the knights. Horsemen just need to access those archers, and they'll be exposed. As VortiX, he shuffles the formation to the back. The archers are going to be exposed, and he's forced to retreat. It's already a lost fight for him. The problem is if he gives up any more ground, his villagers are going to be exposed, and that's going to be a problem. He shifts off of the wood line instantly, but now that means that VortiX is no longer gathering wood and can no longer produce archers.
Hey, just look at the resource bank, 500 food, 300 gold. Mista realized that a clear, just plain fast castle over here isn't going to work for reasons you stated before. The professional scouts would pay off so easily for VortiX, so he's changing up his idea. He's going to start adding some spears, some horsemen, and this way he's limiting the access of VortiX to the hunt. And you see, as I said, because you actually vote those hunts out, you have to make a gate over here to be able to access the majority of those, as it is possible Mista's going to shift in that direction, trying to intercept those scouts.
Not quite quick enough to do so, but this is the power of Horsemen also against Scouts, right? They're so much slower now, so you can actually poke and prod them down, whereas before it was kind of trivial. Horsemen do not find their value in the end, so Scouts will secure some more carcasses. But this pressure is keeping his opponent boxed in. It means that Mista never has to build any defensive structures near his own base, paranoid about his own villages. And you can see he's starting to shift out into the berry bush lines, right? He's starting to get a little bit risque with his eco. He's also dropped the blacksmith. I think this is a flexibility play in case he wants siege engineering. But now, given the state of the game and the lack of pressure that VortiX is able to apply, it looks like Mista is going to cruise to a very quick castle age timing that VortiX cannot even begin to contest.
Exactly. And that is the reason why I kept those villagers around. he wanted to do this sort of semi-fast castle opening for a long time. It's just a matter of the fact that he reacted to what the VortiX was doing, and this is why he added some more army. But this is very dangerous right now for VortiX because he's nowhere close to castle. His army is not suitable to take this fight already, and this is just gonna get worse and worse. And Mista still has quite a lot of stone to work with, so he will be able to pop out some Lancers with double production.
And this is from this state of the game, this is a highly exploitable map for the Mongols, right? Like step redoubt, you're looking at as much gold as possible, and King of the Hill, you know exactly where to find it all, and it's all clustered together. It's so efficient for you, because also, when you set up defenses of outposts that we usually see from step redoubt, like droppers, as they move away from their base, if you look between these initial two big gold veins, let's say he pops down the step redoubt between the two of them, he drops outposts, it covers and defends both of these veins, right? So you're actually getting that little layer of efficiency to how many outposts are required to keep your gold expansion safe.
Mista almost up to Castle Age over here, whereas on the other side, VortiX is just light years away. That's part of the problem is going for this kind of army composition with the French. It just takes forever to get to Feudal Age, or Castle Age, excuse me, because the Royal Knights are extremely food heavy, the Archers are also relatively food heavy, so you're depleting your key resources going into Castle Age, whereas for Mongols, they're just a lot cheaper, a lot more cost effective, and not depleting their gold, making this unit composition. So it is much easier to accumulate the resource needed for Castle Age, whereas for French, it takes a lot of time for them to get to Castle if they maintain military production.
And VortiX had no clue this was going on. Because notice what Mr. kept doing? He kept running the Horseman in range of his vision. He just wanted to let him know, we're still here, by the way. So now VortiX, he gets that a confirmation that Castle's been achieved, and look what he instantly does with his army. It was defending his wood line, but now it needs to move. He knows that going for Castle himself is just not feasible. He needs to get in and punish his opponent before he's able to fully capitalize on his technological advantage.
The Earstones has been pulled all the way to the middle, so the YAM network has been expanded. Spearmen trying to rally to try and intercept those knights. The army of Mista is a little bit spread out though, so he's a little bit of in a precarious position. But the Lancers, and those are Castle Age Lancers, are coming in. He just needs a couple of them to repel this attack.
Yep, and Archers can't quite reach the Spears. Spears delay things long enough. As you say, the Lancers now starting to arrive. The Royal Knights, if they can get their charge off, they can to a certain degree deal with the Lancers. There's just so much crap in there to get through, right? The Spearmen and the Horsemen are really frustrating for VortiX, but here he goes. It's all in. It's do or die now. You either find maximum impact and shut Mr. out, or you are going to be lights out in this game in a matter of minutes. And there it is. Drops the ram straight away. No hesitation. He has to find the impact, and he has to find it now.
And as you see, he's committing all of his resources into production, double ranges, and a school of cavalry is just pumping out cavalry as well. He knows exactly that he needs to fight this, but every moment he delays, he gives a bigger and bigger window to add those Castle Age units for Mista. A couple of seconds ago, it was like 2 Lancers, now it's like 6 or 7. We're seeing some Men-at-Arms being mixed in, and I just don't think that the power is here for VortiX.
I don't think VortiX meant to do that. He garrisoned the battering ram. He didn't get the second one out. He's going to be forced to fight now. The Archer's out of position. The Knights are not holding long enough against the Spears. In fact, the Spears getting maximum value, countering out the unit they've been looking for. The count is looking good still for VortiX, though. The French Knights holding for the moment, but the Lancers and Man-at-Arms coming in, and that is when he's going to clean house. Mista looking like he might just even this up. The army is all but depleted. The battering ram investment is really not paying off anymore for VortiX, and Mista is pushing him back and out.
He has such an easier time reinforcing this battle, and indeed, VortiX is going to tap out. He's realizing that there is no way that he's going to win that fight, and the moment he loses that fight, he's just gonna have no room for recovery. Mista, crucial victory over here with a crystal clean game.
But, you know, we're speculating. We need to see what's going to happen. We're finally underway with game number 5, the longest series of the day here between Mista and VortiX, our final one, and it seems fitting that this one could easily go the long distance here, as we're going to have Delhi Mirror on Hill and Dale.
Right side is going to be VortiX opening up with a mosque immediately in blue, and the same approach is going to be taken by Mista in red, because in such Delhi mirrors, it's a race to efficient production, really, because you're going to be fighting for those sacred sites, and in many ways, this matchup is very similar to what you experienced in Rus mirrors before the actual big patch that nerfed them, because that was something very similar. You did the identical thing, and you were just racing for a certain element of the map, that being the relics. Here is the same thing. You're racing for a certain element of the map, but those are the sacred sites in Feudal Age.
Absolutely. Another thing you're racing towards is those valuable berry bush lines, right? That's just so valuable to both the Deli and the Abysses now, since they buff the gather rates and the capacity for which you can carry back to the drop-off points. And one detail that I noticed straight away looking at this map is Mister actually got some nice condensed berry bushes, right? Two of them on his high ground, one right at the front of his base. Meanwhile, VortiX will have to come out of hiding a little bit more and also shift further down the south to actually extract maximum value for his. So it's a small lead, but it's definitely someone that Mister can leverage because he's going to be playing to the forward of his base. He should naturally be able to actually protect these berry bushes as long as he's ahead. Should Mister ever go on the back foot, that's when it gets shaky. But you can say that same way about both of these berry bushes.
Now, looking at the map as well, we will see one relic on the hill of VortiX here that's actually very well defendable, and that will be valuable in the long run. There's one relic that's moderately well defendable as well for Mista, but it's a little bit more exposed on his side of the hill, and the other three relics are spread out in the middle, so fairly balanced map, well, for the players over here. Worth noting that Mista's gonna have a little more difficult time accessing the sacred sites on the south and the north, because there are a couple of forests that are just blocking the direct path to those.
Yeah, but overall, I'd say that this is a fairly reasonable Sacred Site generation for a Deli Deli mirror matchup. I don't feel like anyone got thrown under the bus on this one, which means we should get a very exciting and very close series. The detail I'm going to be looking towards is like that dance of transition, right? Who's going to blink first? What's the mismatch going to be? Because I could very easily see a situation where, like 12, 13 minutes in the game, both players have all three of the military production buildings because they keep trying to counter each other out.
Dome of Faith coming in right now for VortiX with 3 villagers. On the left side, that landmark is not being constructed just yet by Mista. He's a couple of seconds behind, and in such a mirror matchup, that couple of seconds could actually be very punishing, so we'll have to see if this is going to haunt him. He's already chopping wood, though this is not something that VortiX has started, or at least not on a separate wood line. In fact, he's taking stragglers around his town center, whereas Mista already established a lumber camp.
That's actually a really cool play. It's something that I have been kind of, almost biblical about the importance of when you play Black Forest, right? Is like these straggler trees are so good early on. It's something you don't really see leveraged heavily in Hill and Dale, but in this case, like when you have a few trees like that nearby, it's something that you and the fly can think about doing. A lot of these maps tend to generate without these straggler trees. I'm sure you've noticed that as well, right? They're coming from an AoET background. I feel like most maps in Age of Empires 2, you end up with straggler trees. Sometimes the seeds just say no, and you have nothing nearby, so you have to go into lumber camp. You don't have an alternative choice. But as a result of this, it's given VortiX a slight lead, and it means that he should be able to cruise up into that feudal age a little bit quicker than Mister.
Indeed, in Age of Empires 2, the straggler trees have insane importance, and in AoE 4, it's way less significant. In fact, oftentimes you see players replacing those straggler trees with buildings, because that's something that you can do with those standalone trees out there. I'm actually not a big fan of that, simply because, as you see, for VortiX, it's actually a pretty decent source of wood in case he doesn't want to add a lumber camp early on. So there's definitely some element in me that says that, hey, you shouldn't replace all of them, but it depends on how you want to approach the game, because if you just want to place buildings around your town center, might as well delete those, especially if you are heavy on the lumberjacking department with the wood line already.
Yeah, I think the biggest map that it shows in really is Black Forest, because in Black Forest, you have like 8 of them, 9 of them or whatever, and because you go on those instead of running far off to your wood line, which is far away in Black Forest, you're able to actually get a dock up quicker and produce non-stop ships where players who move their lumber camp out straight away are actually delayed. So that type of map, it definitely shows a lot. If you ever go and watch replays of that, folks, you'll definitely see that more so than you will on this map, but it has made a slight difference to VortiX. It gives him a slight lead, and after he gets up there, Stable's going to be dropped because he scouted out that Mister is building the barracks. Now, this seems like a counterintuitive play, but it does mean that you'll have the flexibility to move these horsemen around the spears, and Mister might find himself quickly just playing Benny Hills in his own base.
And the thing is that you know exactly that Spearman is not going to be the only unit Mista makes. He's likely going to add archers. So, yeah, of course you have your stable coming out right now, but you're going to have an archer range to back it up very soon. Indeed, there it is. Because it's not about, okay, do I have spearmen versus horsemen? It's going to be spears and archers versus horsemen and archers. That's how you have to approach this.
Absolutely. I mean, the days have changed, right? You can't just say, I'm going to build 3 archery ranges and I'll win like that. Hee hee hee. No, you need at least 2 units in your composition. Age of Empires 4, more than most other RTSs, in fact, is a counter-heavy game. And it's been designed that way specifically on purpose. You can see it when you even hover over any unit. It says plus 10 or damage to a scout, or with with the spearman plus 15 damage to cavalry. It's begging you, it's pleading with you to utilize counters. And while transitions can be dangerous to engage with when you're under fire, in this opening, it's so comfortable. There's no pressure already. You're essentially just prepping your first round of arrows, metaphorically, to fire at each other, right? And in this case, both sides will have arrows. Well, one side will have arrows, the other one will only have those metaphorical arrows. And that means that the spearmen are going to be very lackluster in this initial engagement.
Now, Mista is adding a stable over here, so his unit composition will actually be very similar to what he has used in the previous game. It is going to be the spearman and the horseman. And actually, this might work out nicely because... Yeah.
Wow. Huh.
So, the thing is that if you compare to the previous game, spearman, horseman, he was able to take some very good engagements against the French player having knights and archers. Makes me wonder if he's going to have something very similar on his mind right now. He doesn't really have any kind of map presence in the middle, as VortiX is already moving towards the second batch of berries back at home. Mista hasn't started touching those, and he's running out of berries at the starting base, though, so soon he'll have to transition to those. As you said, there's two stables, both of them with efficient production, so I guess... Oh yeah, there is no spearman. This actually is a great idea from Mista. There is not a single spearman from VortiX, so obviously going double stables makes a ton of sense here.
Yeah. Like, he's just doubling down on what works well for him. I mean, honestly, I'm starting to think that Mista is just a big My Little Pony fan. First England with the horsemen yesterday, and now just spamming only horsemen as the deli here. Not even doing in that composition we talked about being so strong. But the smart detail is, like, he almost just wanted this to be revealed. When VortiX moves in the scout and initially sees the racks, notice he didn't go for more info, he just ran back. And it almost was like Mista baited him on purpose. When you drop a Rax at the front of your base and you don't try to deter the scout from going in, you're more or less just feeding false information to your opponent. He never looked for a double stable, and it means this initial fight is going to be heavily favored towards Mista. And it means that VortiX is very quickly going to lose control of the midsection of the map, something he desperately doesn't want to do now that he's started to invest heavily into these scholars, looking to cap all the sacred sites.
And one thing that those horsemen give you is mobility. And that's not something you would normally have with the spearmen, so now you have the numbers advantage with the horsemen, and that gives you unparalleled mobility to try and snipe those scholars. Down south, there's a scholar being killed by wolves. In the middle, you have this scholar now being targeted by the horsemen, and this is just such a great fight here from Mista. He's got the numbers advantage that he can just wipe out that group of archers in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, it's looking a little bit grim for VortiX, but VortiX actually even this up. Look at the count, just drag on both of them. They're very close. The archers are enough to make the difference. I don't feel like this is a good enough account of horsemen. Maybe it's just slightly better micro, but I feel like Mista should have been further ahead on the outcome of this battle. He might still win, but he's going to be limping away with a heavily injured army at this rate.
There was a scholar that was healing up the force of VortiX for a long time, and now there is a scholar coming in for Mista, and he is finishing off those units. It was all about keeping that meat shield of horsemen alive for VortiX, and the reason why it was a little deceiving is because for a long time Mista was focusing it down, but that's the advantage of just bringing in those units really fast, because that's exactly what he's doing. He's got two stables, so it's much easier for him to reinforce the battle, and it's funny that you mentioned that it's almost as if he baited his opponent, or he wanted to bait his opponent into thinking he's going spearman. I think it wasn't just almost as if. He legitimately baited VortiX into thinking that he's going spears.
Yeah. And also now VortiX has to address this. Remember what I said we were probably going to see in this game? The triangle was going to be established, all three military buildings being built. VortiX doubles down on racks now, so he understands what he needs to be present with. And I wouldn't be surprised if Mista sees this and instantly drops the archery range. For the moment, it's going to be the double blacksmith, a little bit more greedy of a play. But when you have this many horsemen out in the field and you're decapping all these points and capping them yourselves, you probably feel confident that even if your opponent is now responding with the triangle of different units, you can kind of cruise forward to Castle Age with enough resources. And when we look at his surplus resources right now, he's already halfway there. Castle Age is looking very feasible and very fast for Mista.
It is looking feasible because he's the only one controlling the sacred site, and also, let's keep in mind that he didn't lose a ton of archers over here. Like, his opponent did lose a bunch of units, and now he has to remake his army from scratch, whereas on the other side, Mista's army was able to retain its value very effectively, so 15 kills to 9 deaths over here is part of the reason why he has the advantage on the food department, and of course, he's also leveraging the fact that he's got the sacred site. Such a great play by Mista over here, and he's going to be ready to go up to Castle Age. I feel like if he gets to Castle, VortiX is just going to fall apart, just like in the previous game.
Yeah, because right now the problem is VortiX isn't out of his base. VortiX has about a minute and a half to get control of these sacred sites, and you have a slow static army with the combination of your horsemen, right? Your horsemen move fast, but everything else is slow. And I feel like this just is going to be a big sink to morally rather, for VortiX the moment he sees that castle age tick up, because he's nowhere near ready himself. He's holding the right amount of gold, but he spent so many chunks of food replacing the lost troops. And even with an army that looks nicely compositioned, right, with the spearmen, the archers, the horsemen being kind of equal amounts, the fact is that that tech upgrade is going to come into play, and then you have about 4 minutes to strike before Mr. is fully online in Castle Age.
And he's got a barracks. That's where that leftover barracks is actually coming in handy, as on the northern side, a scholar from VortiX will be picked off. Down south, it looks like the scholar will stay alive here until the sacred site is going to be capped, because that horseman from VortiX will be taken down. But
Chasing.
VortiX realizes that he needs to launch a counterattack right now.
Yep.
Exactly just like the previous game.
And he goes straight into the base. He forces everyone off the berries, because that is how you're tapping this. This is how you're making sure you got surplus. The problem he has is Mr. already has 800 food surplus for when this tech up completes. While the pressure is decent, you have to admit this army is not big enough to siege. It's going to pressure a little bit, but that tech up is going to complete, and then you're on the clock. You have like 5 minutes to make something happen.
And the men-at-arms will come out in just a matter of seconds. There's only one barracks working over here, and there is not a single scholar in it. The scholar is trying to make a run for it. And if it gets in there, you can get those men-at-arms out quite rapidly, and you just need 3 or 4 men-at-arms to clean this up. This is looking scarier for Mista than it actually is, I think.
Yeah, because Mister's distracted himself. Look at the central sacred site. He sent in like 8, 9 of these horsemen. They got butchered by the spears, and all the while, you have the horsemen of VortiX running in and sniping out all the villagers. Forcing the garrison, forcing them to shift away, and let's look at the eco count. 33 to 42 in the blink of an eye.
Oh, what a collapse there for Mista. It looked so good, but then he just looked away from that army in the middle, and that is just a tremendous amount of units lost over there, because those could have been immensely helpful defending. He's got the castle age advantage now. VortiX is going full feudal, so if Mista is able to maintain control over those sacred sites, there is still a glimpse of hope, but he definitely put himself in a much more difficult situation than he should have been in.
Yeah, and while he'll buffer his opponent out now, the damage is kind of already done. He stopped him from gathering the berries. He's starting to get lancers out, which is nice, but when we look at the eco side of things, after all that, 44 eco for VortiX, 31 for Mista. VortiX reluctant to even consider castle age. As you say, he's kind of all in on the feudal, and he's decapping those sacred sites. One has already been taken out of the equation. He's capping the one in the north, and the southern one will remain with Mista for the moment, but not for long, as a horseman will move out to butcher the remaining skull of 13 health. And then all of a sudden, central control is clearly and definitively in the hands of VortiX.
The question is, how is VortiX going to react to the men-at-arms, because he can, of course, flood the spearmen, but upping all those men-at-arms will be difficult. He's actually taking a pretty decent fight over here, but the men-at-arms are just increasing in numbers, and I'm not sure how long this can be sustained here in Feudal Age for VortiX, but he's getting ready to go into Castle Age himself.
Yeah, this is prepping him. It's keeping his opponent pinned in. He's still taking good trades against the initial man-at-arms. And also now, once again, Mr. is exposing his food line because he can't afford any gaps in his eco. He's draining himself dry. He's his own Dracula in this situation, and the butchering continues. There's just so many spears here. These man-at-arms are just not cutting it right now for Mr.
And behind this, you have 2 sacred sites for VortiX. The win condition here for Mista was that he's leveraging those men-at-arms to secure the sacred sites, and with those sacred sites, he would be able to compensate for his lack of eco. So it's not even about the 13 villager difference, it's about those 2 sacred sites that are working non-stop for VortiX, and by the time Mista is able to neutralize them, VortiX is able to get to Castle Age, and there is no more technology advantage anymore for Mista.
And there is that Castle Age, fully complete now. Home Blades is already being researched. 3 minutes to go for Mista. On the other side, VortiX did also go into House of Learning. He's going to Primer, and he's only 4 minutes out from Home Blades, so there will not be much of a difference between these 2 sides. With the double racks, he can match the man-at-arms count, and so far, these spears have been pristine at pulling apart the initial man-at-arms push out from Mista.
And the most important thing is that VortiX is maintaining control over 2 sacred sites. These red men-at-arms are just not even running in there, and that is just a couple of extra seconds of gold trickle coming in here for VortiX. It started out so well for Mista, but after that, that counterattack just decimated his villager count so badly, and as you said, Mista was distracted. He lost so many horsemen that could have been insanely valuable in that defense.
Critical, in fact. And now, while these man-at-arms will chase the spin back to base and force the villagers away, they're not doing anything. They're chasing an opponent away into his base where he's prepping crossbows to welcome you with open arms and open death. As they will definitely melt in the blink of an eye if there's enough crossbows here. So while Mr. has started to pin his opponent in, I am a little bit concerned about whether he's going to have that power spike because he's waiting on home blades, but the difference is that VortiX won't be relying on it because he's keeping that composition going. It's not just a melee Zerg. It's going to be your range composite to support the effort as the spears and man-at-arms push forward.
Relic is being brought in here by Mista. He feels that he's in trouble and he will try a Vololo. Nope. Nope. Big nope.
Well, nope. More like, yeah, there's just going to be a big fail. They'll just turn around, chase him away. I like how Mista's like, fine, just take the Relic. It was useless anyway. The formation shuffle really does just cripple you in these situations. Scholar is going to be butchered and stabbed down. Sacred Sight will end up in the next minute probably falling under control of VortiX. And the crossbows is just something that Mist is not ready for. Spears will deter the Lancers away. If we look in the base, is there any switch up? We're talking Castle Age, and yet we're not seeing any elephants. And we're also just not seeing the crossbows coming out because Mista still, even 17 minutes into the game, has not built an archery range.
And the problem is that now his unit composition is inferior. If he went into Castle Age before VortiX, and he actually did that, but he wasn't able to take any fights over there, he would have been in the possession of the men-at-arms, and VortiX didn't have a good answer to that in Feudal Age. He doesn't have crossbows, but getting into Castle Age, suddenly VortiX has a direct answer to that single unit that he's making, and of course VortiX also has a superior eco by a massive margin.
And this is starting to just feel like the game before the last one, the HRE one again, where VortiX is transitioning and Mr. is just stubbornly sticking with what he has because he was ahead. Lance is trying to move through in the crossbows, but crossbows will disintegrate everything here. The Lancers, there's just not enough of them to scare off the crossbows. They'll back up, start a step back as they wipe out the cavalry, and in the meantime, the spears have kept the man-at-arms at bay long enough that now the crossbows can easily clean up the rest of this fight. And while that's happening, look what's wrapping in again. VortiX is like, you know what? I got a taste of villager blood last time I was here. I wonder if I can just sneak in a little nibble. These 4 horsemen around the back could easily poke down a bunch of these villagers with Mr. not even noticing.
Mista has no answer to those crossbows. That's the bigger problem. Not only is he losing that battle in the middle decisively, the problem is that there's just no sign for him making anything that's really a reasonable response to all those crossbowmen, and he must feel really bad about this one with all his villagers getting slain at the back, because in that high view game, he actually went arbalestry and it failed so badly, and now he's just seeing his opponent pretty much going full crossbows and working out because he doesn't have a response to those crossbows right now. He's only making man-at-arms and knights.
This really is just kind of a masterclass in experience, understanding the importance of transitioning, right? VortiX is kind of the mentor in this situation, but he's a mean mentor. He took that belt off, and now he's going to beat Mr. to death with it because there is really no way to get out of your base anymore. The only thing he's got going for him, this Hail Mary in the north of gathering deer, is keeping him alive, but it is being drained fast, and it looks like it is going to be enough to convince Mr. there is no point. He doesn't even attempt the transition. He taps out. Frustration might begin setting in as VortiX will now lead. 3-2 is the score. 2 games potentially remaining.
Honestly, I feel like this was the most important game here for the series because this was a game that Mista was very convenient in. He was very convincing in the beginning of the game. His strategy seemed to have worked, and everything was lined up for him to finish this game. So if he ends up losing this set, we'll be looking at this game as the one that probably should have been won for him because everything lined up so well. It was the same game plan as he used in the Mongols game, and it nearly worked to perfection, but that dramatic drop in the villager count just crippled him so much that by the time he recovered, VortiX was able to get to Castle Age, and he just had no answer to those crossbows.
So to me, I think the big issue I'm seeing from Mr., and it's kind of a repeating pattern here, is like he has this element of complacency about his style. And I don't think that's as much like a criticism of him as it is a criticism of an old style of Age of Empires. If you think just a month ago, this whole idea that you don't transition when you're ahead was quite popular. You just zerged a unit, you forced your opponent to address it, and then you had time to like switch over yourself. But it feels like in these games, VortiX, because he's kind of honed this craft, because he understands how important it is to pivot unit types and counter out your opponents, he's already prepping ahead each time. While Mr. is kind of almost being in this stubborn situation of having too many games played on previous patches where he's going, well, when I done this like a month ago, this worked, right? Like I was ahead, he had to respond. I should have like had even fights and then been able to adapt. But instead, because of the way that VortiX is pivoting across these new unit types, he's taking a very clear and emphatic victory initially, and it means that there's no breathing room for Mr. to then wiggle his way into a new unit type. I think Mr. needs to stop thinking old school and think new school, right? Like, new line of thinking is I know what is going to come. I should prep something that counters it now instead of waiting until I see it on my screen and it completely claps me to the floor. Because that has happened now at least twice in this series, and it has led to really brutal and demoralizing losses for Mr. And VortiX has to be fully aware of this weakness by now. He's now seen this multiple times. He's sniffed it out, and he understands that when we go into this limited Civ games where you are going to need to transition still in the remaining matchups, he understands that because he's quicker to this, he can fully exploit it and just punish Mr. for stubbornly sticking on one or two unit types. Hey, man. Like, second qualifiers for losers. I said it first, everyone else was thinking it. We're all about winners here. We're going to see if Mr. can dial this one back. He is trailing as it stands. One game stands between VortiX and qualifying for the $100,000 LAN as we get underway on Lipany with Mongols versus Abbasids.
On the left side, we will have VortiX playing as the Mongols in blue. And down south, we're going to have the Abbasid dynasty coming in here for Mista. Abbasids did get buffed here with their berry gathering, and we've already seen VortiX trying to use Abbasids on an open map. But now we're going to have them face the Mongols here, and you gotta ask yourself the question, how many Camel Archers we could actually see over here, because as much as we have seen that from VortiX in the first game, we could see that from Mista in this one. We had a scout added from the town center by VortiX. This is going to help collecting sheep a tiny bit, whereas for Mista, it looks like he's only operating with one scout, as it seems.
Yeah, so, like, scout situation, VortiX already has that inherent edge of already having a scout to begin with, right, in the Khan that's just much better. And it's not uncommon to go for the second one. I think as the Mongols, you do have the flexibility to play into pro scouts in some situations. We have seen a lot less of it, especially out of the Mongols compared to other civs that still do it occasionally. But if you do go into pro scouts, it's just going to be all yours. There's no real situation in which I see an Abbasid player playing pro scouts because the berry bushes are just so damn good. And it seems that the vegetarian life was pretty good back in the 14th century, if this is anything to go by. But we will see an opening of Rax already just preemptively prepping himself for what he knows is likely coming, right? VortiX has two plays. When you're playing Mongols, you want to have military aggression in Dark Age to start with. It's either going to be you going for horsemen or you going for spears. Either way, this is the answer.
And you need to add those spears over here, because if you look at how the layout of the base is for Mista, his berries and the forest is very close to each other. So he really can't afford to get a tower in his face that's denying both of his berries and those wood lines, especially because the backup forest is also rather close to the first one. So in general, if a tower's aggression comes in from the right side, this could be very difficult to hold against, and he's going preemptively on the spearman, despite not seeing a single production building next to the Ovu. In fact, it makes me wonder if we're going to see this turned into an aggression here, as it very much seems like VortiX is not coming up with any kind of pressure, and he's just thinking about going into Feudal Age.
Yeah, I don't think like there's anything to be gained for him here. He understands that the racks have been dropped. The problem is whether you get rushed on the other side. I think something that we often forget about because we never see it anymore, but definitely I think most of us experienced it in team games in the opening weeks, is the fact that you can actually ram rush as the Abbasids in Dark Age. And if you don't have any military presence at all, I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Hail Marys on this.
Yeah, like I was thinking about that. That's really that do or die type of a build. Basically, I would basically call it a kamikaze build. Like, Dark Age Rampush is extremely expensive and you just got one shot at that. But honestly, it's possible Mista is gambling on that. But even if he isn't, that Ovo is wide open for burning. And this actually could be a nice window for Mista here, because at this point, there is no army at all for VortiX, and that Ovo could just be burned down by the spears. Of course, the gold mines could also be harassed. VortiX is going to pull away the Gur, but he's not in Feudal Age yet, and that Ovo could be taken down.
He does have the required amount of gold, and he's ready to tech up now. As you said, Uvu's going to be attacked. And I think VortiX made this choice because of where the Uvu is. It's not a good position to be aggressive with. It's not close enough to be economically viable. This Uvu just kind of exists in the game until a few minutes later. It's like possibly the worst type of spawn for a Mongol player. It's not well protected behind your base. It's not forward as a staging point. It's just off to the side as some weird kind of flappy extension on the primary. So, looks like it might end up having to be sacrificed. Tech up is underway. This does mean that VortiX, like, he's not going to tap out. He doesn't think the game is done because of the fact that Mr. is invested in Spearmen like this and continues to slog them out. It does mean that Mr. hasn't left room to quickly tech up himself.
Yeah, I feel like now this is getting closer and closer to an all-in because you're seeing Mr. just continuously pumping out Spearmen, and even if he burns down the Ovu, he has to be aware that even just a couple of archers popping out for VortiX the moment he reaches Feudal Age is enough to win him the game, or at least just wipe out this entire army. But you gotta wonder what exactly Mist is planning over here. His resources aren't looking that terrible though. Look at that, that's the berry bonus that you're looking at from the Abbasids, and that is gonna be an Ovu burned down.
Yep, and no way that it can easily be protected. And they're not cheap, remember. The Uvus cost 150 wood. You missed that from your earlier game economy. It's pretty painful. And you know you're going to have to replace it at some stage just to get access to the military presence again. And it looks like Mr. hasn't just churned out non-stop spearmen. He did slowly push one or two extra, but he understands that actually, like, this amount of investment at this stage is good to get rid of the Uvu, to deny your opponent that hyper-aggression militarily at the start of Feudal. So if you just back off, maybe raid a little bit more, but don't, like, overinvest. Even if your opponent now counters you with archers, the important part is that the Mongol player is not going to be aggressive on your base. And it means you might even be able to access something greedy, like, say, a secondary TC.
That's an option, but I'm not necessarily a big fan of that. I get the feel that it might actually be better to just go for the full push in here, because as you see, VortiX doesn't have a single production building. You start adding archers here for Mista as you hit Feudal Age, and you already have the ability to make rams as you get to Feudal with the blacksmith. In fact, you can already make rams in Dark Age. So you could technically turn this into a very aggressive Abbasid play and punish the fact that VortiX is not making a single military unit right now.
But Mr. says, la 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 la, can't hear you, as 5 villagers are working on stone right now. And there's a good reason behind this. It's the same reason we don't see these Dark Age ram rushes anymore, is if you do rush in with just spears protecting this ram, these villagers will burn it to the ground. And your spearmen don't kill villagers that quickly, right? And you don't have many spearmen. You know your opponent already has an archery range. Like, it feels like it's such a hard strategy to pull off. I think you have like a 30-second window where ram rush makes sense, but it's like finding that initial influx of wood in your eco is tough. And if you even just invest in a House of Wisdom, it almost feels like that option immediately evaporates and you just have to play towards the later timing. So I'm quite glad that Mr. didn't go into the ram rush. I feel like one ram wouldn't be good enough to end this game, at least not for VortiX. It probably would have ended it in favor of VortiX.
Yeah, I think that at this point, Mr. like his only tools to make a ram rush happen would have been to add archers in here. He was mining stone, and VortiX is aware of this one, and now VortiX has had an archer range that's actually very convenient over right next to the town center on the left side. It's gonna be pastured as well, and now we're seeing archers trickling through the map, all hidden in that stealth forest, so Mistas might not actually spot them, and they could just pop out of the shadows. Mista doesn't have any tools to stop archers right now, and those lumberjacks are dangerously exposed.
He's prepping it, though. Double stable now being dropped. He's not going to waste any time. He understands that he needs to have the critical mass of horsemen to push VortiX back. And with VortiX already now flaunting those archers in his face, he knows he's got maybe a minute max before he has to have a defense force in place.
Indeed, VortiX doesn't have a single spearman on the battlefield, and Mista going for the double stable horseman double town center build of the Abbasids. That's just a pretty common way of playing Abbasids. In fact, a build that VortiX pioneered some time ago. But of course, VortiX is increasing his army numbers, and we're seeing barracks being added. And the Mongol infantry flood is likely about to begin, because there's just a ton of stone in the bank right now for VortiX, so he can really flood out those spearmen and archers.
Yeah, and this is like the only Civ that can do this opening, by the way. The Abbasids probably, I think that's a fair statement. They're the only ones that can do double stable and double TC at 8 minutes in. The reason being is because of fresh foodstuffs, which is now being researched. All of a sudden, you're not paying additional for these villages. You make the investment in a TC, and now you're spending 25 food in each of these, which means you have that additional food income to push into Horsemen, which became even more affordable and even earlier point for Abbasids ever since those berry bushes got buffed for the gather rates and the capacity you carry back to the mill.
Exactly. The berry bonus gives you a tremendous amount of food income, and that just allows you to facilitate that double town center villager production alongside the stables. And of course, you only pay one villager's cost for two with the fresh foodstuffs upgrade, but still, you need to be able to maintain production on both town centers and potentially both stables as well. That requires a lot of food, and the berry bonus helps a lot with that.
Or I'll teach you a better way to say it, Lidakor. You buy one, you get one free. Say it with me. You buy one, you get one free. Does that not sound good?
Sell one and you get 3 for 2.
Oh, sorry. I realized we're in RTS land. Let me put it more in RTS form. You get more work. Pretty good, right? You get more work. That's all that matters here, and you don't pay more for it. You get that floating economy. It's going to be important that he protects himself, though. Like you said, VortiX is going to try and ramp up here, but it looks like actually VortiX is ramping up in a different way. Look at those eco numbers. The sheep game is strong in this, boy. Free pastures at the ready, churning out the sheepies, ready to be butchered and churned into the grinding eco of the Mongol player as he's prepping for a Castle Age boom.
Not only is he prepping for Castle Age, he's running towards those villagers on the right side. Now, Mista is going to spot those archers coming in, but one thing that Mista doesn't really have is numbers. He's at 8 army right now. Some of that are still spearmen, I believe, and now he's adding triple archer ranges. I get the feel that by the time he starts adding those archers and potentially the horsemen, his opponent is just going to get to Castle Age, as you said.
Yeah, he's just vibing right now. VortiX is like, this is really cut and dry. I mean, like, is Mista going to come back and pressure me? He burnt one Uvu. And, like, it's almost like kind of like that feeling of, haha, the Mongols have lost their Uvu. They suck now. No. They're still very economically strong. And in the next 2 or 3 minutes, Mista, you're going to learn that the hard way. Really hard.
The puzzling thing is that Mista has scouted the area where the other stone mine is at, so he's aware of that stone mine. So, like, even after destroying that Ovu, since he hasn't been pressuring his opponent for a long time, it should be obvious that the Ovu was rebuilt. Obviously, it's going to slow down VortiX a tiny bit, but Mista is also slowed down quite considerably. I mean, 2 town centers, 2 stables, and 3 archer ranges worth of production is a gigantic amount of investment.
And there's the depressing news. Castle Age reached. Mista still straggling on the gold and barely has anyone working at it. He's trying to fix that now. But this fixation on military presence early leaves him heavily exposed. VortiX already prepping to push up, but he's not even going to wait. He actually calls it. He doesn't even look to fight. I don't know if it's that fatigue we were talking about, but Mista has had enough of this qualifier. He will call GG, and VortiX will be the 3rd player to qualify for N4C.
If you just look back at that Hill and Dale game, we talked about how mentally depleting that is. You look back at the Highview game, and you just see the desperation creep in. Like, with this Abbasid dynasty, obviously this is a top civilization matchup for them, but this was the first time in this entire set where Mista didn't feel like he had a good game plan going into this one. And this entire game just tells me that he was just trying to scramble for something and realized it's not gonna work. VortiX killed 4 units, Mista didn't kill a single unit in this game, and I'm not going to say that Mista went into this game cluelessly, but it really felt like he didn't really have a ton of options left with the Abbasids against Mongols here. And that's where we're looking back at the 2 games where things were looking good for him for a long time, but in the end, VortiX was able to close those out.
Yeah, I think the more kind of weirdly highlightable thing is, if you remember what I was criticizing Mista for in previous games, it was the fact that he wasn't diversifying his army enough. The weird part about this game is it's almost like he's like, I hear you, Pidge. I know where you're coming from. Don't worry, mate. I got this one. Drops all 3 types of military production buildings en masse, right? What was that? There was a racks. Actually, it was escalation the whole way through. Starts with 1 racks, gets 2 stables, then gets 3 archery ranges. And it feels like you've just like, I've got all these military buildings, but no tech, right? It's almost just this weird overcompensation. It's almost like he understood exactly why, and he should, he's a talented player, why he lost the 3rd and the 5th game. And then over-calibrates in the 6th game, realizing like, oh no, VortiX is going to do it to me again. He's going to have 3 unit types. He's going to out-comp me. He's going to transition pass, and then I'm in trouble. Instead, he gets the bad news that VortiX has no intent of doing that. He just techs up. He's like, this is so simple. I mean, I played him like a fiddle. He's in for a penny, in for a pound now, never getting out of Feudal. And I feel like at that stage, the frustration has just boiled over. I wouldn't be surprised if a little bit this was tilt. Mr., like you said before, he doesn't like these long series. He tends to get fatigued, a little bit drained. And I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of set in. Like, he's beating himself up over game 3 and 5. He comes into game 6. He understands what he done wrong in game 3 and 5. Probably is still thinking about it a little bit too much. Overbuilds in the Feudal, and all of a sudden looks like a headless chicken in the fog lights of VortiX's truck that runs him down.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chad has been saying some very interesting things over here because one thing that we're noticing if you look at the villager graph is that there's a minimal discrepancy. It really feels like Mista may have even stopped or didn't even start making villagers in that second town center because
Oh, wow.
there is no way that he was just like 3 or 4 villagers at that time. It's just not gonna work. And as I said, the thing here is that this was the game where it really didn't feel like Mista had a good game plan going into this one, as if his entire strategy was built upon the fact that, okay, I'm trying to avoid the scenario of fighting against Mongols and Abbasids, or like maybe he looked at this set and said, okay, I'm just going to use up my Abbasids against his Mongols simply because I will just sort of acknowledge that I will lose the game and I will win the rest. The problem is that he didn't win the rest, and by the time the Mongols were picked, he sort of was just left with the Abbasids, and that's why, as you said, that looming presence of the Mongols is just so dangerous. If Mongols was used in the first game and Mr. just went, let's say, Abbasids, he might just say, okay, whatever, I'm gonna try my best with Abbasids here, but I know that I'm just sort of giving away a weak civilization for a powerful from my opponent. But here,
Yeah.
you just couldn't afford to give this game away anymore.
And this is the experience of playing RCSs for years, really bleeding through for VortiX at a high competitive level. Like, he understands that this game in a long series isn't actually decided simply by who wins each individual game. It's the drafting strategy. Draft is such a big element. I'm a bit of a nerd for it because I come from like a MOBA background, and draft is key there, right? Like, what heroes do we pick? How do we counter this out? But it's the same in this situation. I think it's very easy to get mixed up in an individual game and talk about the counters like Spearman beats Horse, all this other crap. But when you look at it from a wider picture and you match up the maps and you match up the civs, I think something that actually VortiX has been phenomenal at doing, even months ago, last year in fact, was understanding that when these series do go long, when you're talking BO5s and BO7s, there's a whole new layer to the game. You're not playing an Age of Empires 4 match anymore. You're playing AoE 4, the grand strategy game. And that requires some big brain thinking where you take a step back and assess what you can do to your opponent. And one thing that VortiX has been doing for a long time in these longer bouts is dragging the Mongols out. Just kind of looming it there, waving it above you, teasing you, saying, I might pick this now. And it's always in the forethought of your mind because Mongols has been easily the single most oppressive civ consistently from release up to present time.